The science of Derby, the science of Derby. Let's learn something new.
Hi, and welcome to the Science of Derby with me, Professor Legs. This is our first episode on gear, and I have a whole slew of gear episodes planned in my head, so let me know in the comments if there's something that is super interesting to you. This is part one of a very exciting trilogy, the Bearings, Wheels, Stops trilogy. Take a look at this classic Flintstone car. Now, ignoring some of the structural issues with the car and with my amazing drawing skills, it's not fundamentally different than a lot of some ancient wheeled vehicles. You have an axle, which is like a stick stuck into the stone, and it rotates within a wooden frame. Aside from being pretty bumpy, this wheel is going to be quite slow. And why is that? Well, the axle is quite rough. It's just a piece of wood, and it's fit into a relatively rough socket. So as it turns, that's going to create friction and create heat. It's going to slow everything down, and over time will eventually damage the components, and you'll need to replace everything. And if you have a giant stone wheel, that's a little bit complicated to replace. Wheeled movement in history is fascinating, so I definitely recommend you check it out. Today we're going to jump over a huge hunk of this super exciting, weird, wonderful history and move right to kind of where we are today, ball bearings. Let's take a look at your basic roller skate, and in particular, the truck. This is a T-shaped hunk of metal that's made up mostly of the horizontal part that your wheels stick on, that's called the axle, and the kingpin, which is the part that attaches it to the rest of your plates. We're not going to talk about that today. Check out the video on plates to learn more about that. We are going to talk about axles. And for roller derby, axles are generally 8 millimeters in diameter for anything made in the United States and 7 millimeters everywhere else. And there are some manufacturers that make both 7 millimeter and 8 millimeter. So make sure you pay attention when you're buying your stuff so everything fits together and your wheels don't fall off. So the axle is a solid hunk of metal, meaning it doesn't rotate. The wheels are going to turn around that axle. This is a lot different than the Flintstone car we looked at earlier, or a modern day car where the axles themselves are rotating and the wheels are fixed onto the axle. So if roller derby axles aren't moving, how does the wheel spin around? The answer, of course, is the bearings. It sits on the axle, and that's what causes the spinning. And I should say bearings because there's two of them, one on the outside and one on the inside, and the wheel fits on the axle in between the bearings. And the bearings spin, and that's how the wheel spins around, even though, as you've noticed, the wheel has no moving parts either. So axle, no moving parts, wheel, no moving parts, just the bearing that spins. So let's put in some bearings. I'm wearing gloves because bearings are notoriously greasy. And if you check out your wheel, you'll notice inside the hub, which can be plastic or metal, there's a little groove on either side, and the bearings pop right into that. And you can actually take your bearing. You'll notice the shield is facing outwards. We'll talk about that later. Shield is facing out. I can actually pop it in with my hand. Yeah. To get this out again, you'll need a bearing tool. The most common ones look like a little T. They're about $10. You put them in, push the button, and pull, and out they'll come. I would show you that, except that I lent mine out, and I didn't get it back yet. No big deal. You can also use one of these giant bearing machines to get the bearing out. You just put it on the end here, pull, and the bearings will pop right out. These machines are also great for putting bearings in. Let me show you that. Take your bearings with the shields facing out. Just put them in ever so gently. Set the wheel on this pokey part. And squeeze. And you've got perfect bearing placement. You definitely do not need a machine like this, but if you are changing your bearings a lot, they're handy. Like if you're a skate shop, or maybe if you have a team locker room, you want to buy one, mount it on the wall or table or something, so everyone can use it. Why not? Here's just a little note. If you're using Bont Royal Assassins, which is what I'm skating on these days, I love the wheels. The hubs are metal, and bearings don't actually pop into them. They kind of sit in them. And you don't even need a bearing tool to change them. They just kind of can shake out. To tell you the honest truth, I don't like this very much because they don't fit perfectly, so there's a little play between them, and that leads to the bearings breaking down very quickly, as fast as 1 month or 3 months. They'll start clicking and you got to replace them. They're hard to get. They're super expensive. Bont. I wish they just fit in really nicely. Just saying. The wheels though, Royal Assassins, they're amazing. All right, we've got our bearings in our wheel. What's next? We just put it on the axle like so. Take the nut and tighten it, and we'll be ready to go. Now, here's a few tightening tips. If you change your wheels a lot, you might want to get a handy power drill. Can really speed up the process. But do not tighten it all the way with this drill, because if you over tighten, you're going to damage your bearings, which is not a good thing at all. It will bend the shield, it's going to get dust in, it's going to wreck them. So always finish off with a hand tool. Probably one came with your skates, and you just tighten it up. Now, if you spin the wheel and it stops, you've over tightened it and you want to loosen it right away. If it's still shaking back and forth, it's not tight enough. So you want to tighten just right, so the wheel's still spinning, but that the nut is hugging the bearing just right. Check it out. It's amazing. It's perfect. And we're ready to go. How is that wheel spinning? Let's find out. If you were to cut them in half lengthwise and look at a cross section, you'll see 7 teensy-tiny little balls. These will be stainless steel or some sort of alloy, or maybe ceramic. And they're held in place relative to each other with plastic spacers. These spacers could actually be metal, but in the case of skate and derby bearings, they're almost always some sort of plastic. Surrounding the ball bearings and everything inside here is a whole bunch of gross, slimy grease, which is very likely to get all over your hands and your clothes, so don't wear white shirts when you're changing wheels, and wear gloves if you can. That's my personal advice to you. To keep all that gross grease in, and to keep dust and little rocks and stuff out, there will usually be a shield covering this. And there's almost always a shield on the outside, and sometimes there's a shield on the inside as well. This is the part you don't want to bend when you're tightening, because then more dust and rocks and stuff can get in. The way this all works, when the wheel's on your axle and your weight's on it, is the inside of the bearing will be fixed, it won't spin, and the outside will spin, allowing your wheel to go as those little ball bearings roll around inside. And that's how it all works. You can measure how well everything is spinning by giving the whole system a coefficient of friction, which is saying how much the friction is slowing everything down. And we usually use the Greek letter mu for this. And we are going to talk all about all sorts of different mu's in the wheel video and in the stopping video, so check those out. But for bearings in general, especially in something like roller derby, we say they spin so well compared to everything else that they spin perfectly. There's no friction. We don't have to worry about the friction inside the ball bearing. You can get a good look at how all this works by checking out my cool necklace, or I have an earring here made out of a ball bearing. They are super cool. I got these at playoffs last year. I will put the link to the cool person that makes them, and you can order your own. They're beautiful. And if you look carefully, you can see 7 little ball bearings in there. If you look really carefully, you can see the spacers. And obviously, if you fix the inside, the outside spins. If you fix the outside, the inside spins. Super fun, super cool, super beautiful. Check them out. They have lots of different stones you can get. It's very fun. You can play all day. Let's go a bit deeper inside the bearing. Let's take a cross section in the other direction of just the top half of the bearing. So the top purple part here is facing the outside of the wheel, and the bottom purple part is near the axle. And that bearing, let's say it's the top one of those 7 ball bearings. The upper track is called the outer race because it's closest to the outside of the wheel, and the ball bearing races around, I guess. And the bottom track we call the inner race because it's closest to the axle or the inner part of the wheel. The ball bearings and these races are polished super smooth, so there's very minimal friction, especially with all that lubrication inside, and spins around really easily. Any imprecisions in the manufacturing or in the polishing, or if things don't line up just right, is going to cause increased friction, and things are going to be slower, and they'll also wear quicker. And the more wear, the more friction, which of course can cause even more wear, which is a bad situation. If little rocks or dust get through that shield somehow, you can also get additional wear as the ball bearings are spinning around, and they'll cause scratches and more friction and slow things down and make noises. And this is at some point inevitable. Eventually, you're just going to have to replace the bearings. And just a note, most ball bearings you'll encounter are made of steel or some sort of alloy. You can also see ceramic bearings out there. There's not really a huge difference in terms of precision or friction or anything like that, but ceramic ones tend to last a lot longer and have better wearing properties. They're also a lot more expensive, so if you have the cash, you want longer lasting bearings, ceramic is probably the way to go. Precision in bearings is measured on a scale put out by an engineering standards body, ABEC, and the higher the rating, the more precise the bearing is. So you might see ABEC 7 or ABEC 5. Well, the ABEC 7 bearing has tighter controls on the precision than the ABEC 5, so in general, it's going to be more precise. There'll be less imperfections. However, it's really important to remember we play a brutal sport. It's super intense. We play on dirty floors. There's tons of cutting and slicing and jumping. You do a giant apex jump, landing on 2 wheels while twisting. And there's all sorts of bearing unfriendly stuff going on. Lots of shearing and twisting forces going on, which is going to put extra stress on your bearings. That means to me, unless you're doing a race and you need every little millisecond of speed for the first 30 minutes of your brand new bearing's life, then super high precision isn't actually what you need. What you need is something that works good enough and that lasts super long. Let's wrap up with a few quick tips. So if you see an ABEC number on bearings, it's referring to precision. It'll probably be ABEC 3, 5, 7, and the higher the number, the more precise, the lower the tolerance for any imperfections in the manufacturing process. Ceramic versus steel bearings is really a personal financial choice. Ceramic should last longer, and it will definitely cost you more. I very strongly believe in roller derby that durability very quickly overshadows precision. Of course, this is all a personal choice, depends on your style, depends on what feels right, depends on your budget, and just go with what you like. So if you are new to derby or new to buying gear, I do have a few tips for you. All of this is really personal, but gear is expensive and it's hard to know what to do. You walk into a shop and there's a million options. So I want to give you a little direction if you're new to this. First of all, if you can afford it, for every set of wheels you buy a new set of bearings. Just put them in. When the bearings wear out, you can replace the whole set of bearings. This is in contrast to having, for example, 3 sets of wheels and 1 set of bearings, where you have to keep changing the bearings anytime you change your wheels. Secondly, I would recommend cleaning the dust and dirt off your bearings quite frequently. You can even take them off your axle and clean the axle. I can get this red curly hair wrapped around or dirt and dust and just keep them clean. I do not recommend generally. You can take your bearings out, take the shield off, take all the ball bearings out. You can really strip down the bearings and clean them all out, re-lube them, put them back together. I generally don't recommend this. It's fun to do once or twice to learn about bearings, but to be honest, it's a ton of work, super messy. So I don't want to get into gear comparisons, but if you're newer to derby and you're looking for a relatively inexpensive, really long-lasting kind of workhorse bearing that's going to last you for years, I really recommend Reds by Bones. Not only are they red, which is a great color, but they are super long lasting. They're probably going to last you for years. Also, Powell and Peralta, Bones Brigade, Tony Hawk, come on! You can't go wrong with this. But also, I think scientifically and philosophically, they have the right approach. I'm linking an article below by George Powell about the design of the bearings, and essentially, reds don't even have an ABEC rating because George Powell, the engineer, strongly believes it has nothing to do with how the bearings are used. So for skating or roller derby, it's not about precision, it's really about durability and working for the task we put them to, which of course I agree with completely. They have really nice ceramic ones if you have the cash, but otherwise these reds are pretty high quality. They're not that expensive. I highly recommend them. If you're a more experienced skater, feel free to disagree with me. In fact, why don't you tell me what you like in the comments? That would be awesome, and we can have a discussion about it. I can even check them out. But for a first place to start, reds is the way to go. That's it for the show. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it gives you a sense of how wheels turn and how we roll around. Stay tuned for part 2 of this exciting trilogy, which is on wheels, and of course part 3, which is on stops. See you soon.
The science of derby, the science of derby. Let's learn some.